While my mother-in-law was happily shopping with my husband's mistress, I was busy canceling all their cards. She still has no idea that the palace she lives in belongs to me. My revenge has only just begun. Now, mark your attendance with a subscription, a like, and a comment. That was the last calm breath I took before the operation started. If you like stories where a woman stops asking, "Why me?" and instead starts asking, "Where's the weak point?" go ahead and stay close, because nothing about what happened next was accidental. Everything had a timestamp, a motive, and a consequence. My name is Laura Bennett, and for most of my marriage to Daniel Bennett, I played the role everyone expected. The organized one, the reasonable one, the one who gave second chances because he was just stressed. His mother, Margaret, always repeated that line with a sort of rehearsed concern, like she was reading instructions off a cue card. I used to believe it. I used to believe a lot of things. The day this started, I was standing in the hallway of the house Margaret calls her home, even though the deed is under my name and has been for 9 years. She likes to tell guests that Daniel took over the mortgage when he became more stable. She never specifies what more stable means. I certainly couldn't define it, unless she meant stable enough to gaslight me creatively. That morning, my phone lit up. 2 alerts, both from the same bank, both from cards linked to Daniel, both declined. I had pressed the button not even 30 seconds earlier. And while the system did its job, miles away, Margaret and the woman my husband was secretly in love with, yes, I already knew, were trying to buy designer shoes on my credit line. I almost felt bad for the cashier watching the disaster unfold. Almost. Let me back up just a little. Not too far, because I don't want to bury you in backstory. But you need to understand the moment when everything inside me shifted from hurt to method. Daniel had been distant for months. Not the kind of distant that comes from stress or grief, but the kind that comes from someone who already thinks they've found a better option. You can always tell. The phone turned face down. The sudden gym dedication, the new cologne he claimed a co-worker recommended. The co-worker was named Stephanie. She wasn't just a co-worker. Still, the betrayal itself wasn't what broke me. What broke me was the arrogance, the assumption that I wouldn't notice, wouldn't check, wouldn't question. The assumption that I, the woman who built the financial backbone of our household, wouldn't understand what he was quietly shifting behind my back. Because while he was shifting, so was I. I had discovered the first piece of evidence by accident. Well, he thought it was an accident. A loan application draft on his laptop, one he clearly didn't intend for me to ever see. It listed the house as collateral. My house. In his name. A signature block waiting for my forged agreement. I stared at it long enough to feel my heartbeat slow into something cold, something procedural. I didn't explode. I didn't confront him. I didn't even blink. I just copied the entire draft, exported the metadata, and saved it to a folder I named Winter, because winter is when things die, and I already knew something in this marriage was about to. That was 3 weeks before the shopping trip. By the time Margaret and Stephanie paraded into that luxury mall like they were auditioning for some delusional reality show, every card Daniel depended on was already under my authority. People forget how finances actually work in a marriage when one partner is the organized one. They forget whose name appears on the accounts. They forget who set up the banking structure in the first place. Daniel forgot a lot. He also forgot that I don't operate on impulse. I operate on documentation. And maybe you're thinking, Laura, why didn't you leave the moment you found the draft? Why didn't you confront him? Why didn't you run? Because confrontation gives the other person a chance to rewrite the story. And I wasn't ready for him to do that. Not yet. Plus, I needed more than anger. I needed pattern. I needed proof that what I was sensing wasn't a one-time betrayal, but a strategy. A strategy in which Margaret was often the supporting actress. And trust me, she played her part well. Soft voice, constant apologies. Daniel is under pressure, dear. Pressure doesn't accidentally produce a fraudulent loan draft. But the moment that really sealed this phase of the operation was a simple screenshot. Stephanie, in a message to him. I can't wait until we're finally stable, when everything is moved to your name. Everything. Her word, not mine. I remember reading that text and sitting down on the edge of the bed, my hand steady, my breath steady, feeling something inside me settle with a clarity that bordered on clinical. I wasn't the unstable one. I wasn't the emotional one. I wasn't the fool. I was the witness. And now, I was going to be the architect. If you've ever been underestimated like that, so deeply that it almost becomes funny, leave a comment with just a single. I'll know you understand this feeling of quiet ignition, this moment when pain stops shouting and starts calculating. Back to the mall. The reason I started the story there is because that's the moment everything external began to fall apart for them. Daniel, Margaret, and Stephanie didn't know it yet, but the financial floor under their feet had started to crack. And I wasn't rushing. I wasn't eager for revenge. I was patient, the way an auditor is patient, the way an attorney is patient when they know the other side just perjured themselves without realizing it. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have imagined, is that the same afternoon, while those two women were arguing with a confused store clerk about why Daniel's card wasn't going through, someone else would contact me with information that would turn this from a betrayal story into a pattern story. Someone who knew Daniel long before I did. Someone whose name I had seen once, years ago, in a context he begged me to ignore. But I wasn't ignoring anything anymore. And when she finally reached out, her first sentence wasn't a greeting. It was a warning. Her name was Emily Carter, and I knew that name the way you recognize a sound you once heard in the dark and tried to forget. Years ago, when Daniel and I had just started dating, a message from someone named Emily popped up on his phone. He brushed it off, called her a friend going through a lot, and told me she tended to misread situations. I didn't push. Back then, I was still giving him the benefit of the doubt, the kind that feels generous until you realize it was being weaponized. Emily found me through LinkedIn, of all places. A platform where people hide behind polished professionalism, but her message didn't bother with polish at all. Laura, if you're still with Daniel, I need to talk to you. This is about money, not emotions. Money, not emotions. She knew exactly how to reach me. I gave her a 15-minute window for a call, mid-afternoon, precisely when I knew Daniel would be in his weekly operations meeting. She called at the exact minute we agreed on. Her voice was calm, almost too calm for someone discussing the ruins of her past. That was my first clue that she, like me, had already burned through the panic stage and arrived at the analytical one. Before I tell you anything, she began, I want you to know I'm not looking for drama. I'm just tired of cleaning up damage he causes to other women. Other women, plural, not another woman, not someone else. A lineage, a pattern. She explained that she had dated Daniel for 2 years before me. Margaret had loved her. Of course she had. Emily fit the mold. Polite, agreeable, forgiving, financially stable, perfect material for Margaret's worldview. Women exist to support Daniel's potential. Emily said Daniel convinced her to co-sign a business line of credit for a pre-approved project. It wasn't pre-approved. It didn't even exist. He drained the line, defaulted, disappeared, and left her to clean up the wreckage. She spent 4 years climbing out of the crater he left behind. When she finally tried reporting him, the case went nowhere because she had willingly co-signed. They told me I should have known better, she said quietly. I'm telling you so no one says that to you. There was something about her tone, plain, unembellished, almost procedural, that made me believe her faster than I expected. She wasn't trying to vilify him beyond the facts. She wasn't trying to make herself a tragic figure. She was stating data, and data is the backbone of every operation. I asked her to send me whatever she still had, emails, screenshots, transaction logs. She already had them organized in folders, another sign that Daniel had underestimated the wrong woman twice. When the files arrived, I opened the first email thread and felt a sickening déjà vu. His writing style, his emotional cycles, his excuses, they were templates. The same sweetness before the same coldness. The same, trust me, babe. The same sudden disappearances. The same urgent requests, followed by silence. He wasn't spontaneous. He was rehearsed. When I thanked her, she paused. Laura, she said, don't let him convince you that you're paranoid. He counts on women hating each other. Don't give him that satisfaction. And she hung up. I sat alone in the quiet of the house, not crying, not shaking, just absorbing. It wasn't devastation I felt. It was alignment, a sense that someone had finally turned the lights on in a room I'd been stumbling through for years. And in that clarity, I realized something crucial. Daniel wasn't drifting away emotionally. He was repositioning strategically. Margaret wasn't lost in denial. She was smoothing the path. And Stephanie? She was simply the next participant who had been told the same script. My next instinct wasn't to confront him. Confrontation gives manipulative people space to rewrite history in real time. I didn't want a performance. I wanted evidence. So I went into the guest room, my temporary war room, and started logging everything. 3 columns: behavior, motive, proof. It wasn't emotional. It was forensic. I didn't judge myself for staying. I didn't judge myself for doubting. I didn't judge myself for believing him in the past. I just recorded the data. Because data doesn't gaslight. Around midnight, Daniel came home. I heard his footsteps, light, practiced, the gait of someone who wants to appear relaxed. He leaned against the doorway, pretending exhaustion, and said something about a tough day at work. He carefully avoided mentioning that his mother and mistress had just melted down in a luxury store over declined cards. He kissed my forehead and went to shower. And that's when he did something almost convincing, something that, in a different relationship, might have worked. He sat beside me afterward, shoulders tense, and whispered, "Laura, I know I haven't been myself. I'm overwhelmed. I don't want us to drift. I'll do better." It was a good performance. Soft voice, damp hair, vulnerability. But every piece of evidence I had, every timeline, every message, every whisper from Emily, told me one thing. This wasn't remorse. This was maintenance, maintaining access, maintaining control, maintaining the illusion that I was still the supportive resource he needed. I touched his arm lightly and said, "We'll figure it out." He smiled, relieved. He had no idea what I meant by we, because what I was figuring out had nothing to do with saving the marriage. It had everything to do with dismantling his strategy from the inside. Then my phone buzzed, an alert I wasn't expecting that soon. Something that blew apart the timeline I thought I was working with. A new name had been added to one of Daniel's accounts, Stephanie's, and that changed everything. When I saw Stephanie's name appear as an authorized user on one of Daniel's secondary accounts, I didn't react. My face didn't move. My breathing didn't change. But a part of me, some sharp, dormant part, finally clicked into its final position. He wasn't just shifting lines of credit. He was onboarding her. Preparing her, grooming her financially the way he had once tried to groom me, the same pattern Emily described, the same blueprint, updated with a new target. It would have been almost poetic if it weren't so insulting. I stared at the notification for a long time, not because it hurt, but because it confirmed the scale of what I was dealing with. This wasn't infidelity. Infidelity is sloppy, emotional, irrational. This was structured, intentional. A transition plan. He was slowly moving his personal risk into my assets and her loyalty. It was a perfect storm, unless you were the one holding the ownership papers to the palace his mother believed she ruled. I remember leaning back in the chair, letting my mind map out a timeline without forcing it. 3 weeks of suspicious behavior, cross-checked with the metadata from the loan draft. Margaret's increased presence at the house, always under the guise of helping. Stephanie's sudden appearance in conversations, framed as a co-worker trying to grow in the company. All of it made sense now. He wasn't drifting from me emotionally. He was repositioning his future financially, and he expected me to sleep next to him while he did it. Around 6 a.m. the next morning, before Daniel woke up, I drove to a small cafe near the lake. I needed somewhere neutral, a place where no one would interrupt the part of my mind that had finally gone silent enough to think. I opened my laptop, secured my hotspot, and accessed every account he believed I'd forgotten to monitor. I didn't touch anything. I didn't block anything. I simply observed. Observation, when done correctly, is more powerful than any confrontation. Patterns don't lie. Stephanie's access had been added around 11:47 p.m. While he was telling me he wanted to do better, that detail mattered. Not emotionally, strategically. It meant he wasn't just reckless. He was confident. Too confident. Confident enough to believe that whatever he was building behind my back, he'd finish before I noticed. He forgot the fundamental rule of deception. The person who watches quietly is the most dangerous one in the room. As I reviewed the access logs, the cafe door opened and sunlight cut across the floor. I didn't look up, but someone sat down across from me and spoke in a low voice. "Are you the one looking for financial abuse patterns?" I froze, not out of fear, but out of calculation. I looked up, expecting a stranger who overheard something, but it wasn't a stranger. It was someone I hadn't seen in almost 2 years, Olivia Grant, an old co-worker I hadn't talked to since she left the firm. She had always been sharp, observant to the point of discomfort, and she never wasted words. Seeing her there felt almost unreal. "I saw your LinkedIn activity spike last night," she continued. "It looked familiar. I didn't understand until she gave me the smallest nod, almost imperceptible, like someone acknowledging a secret code. "You dated Daniel too," I said slowly. Her exhale told me everything. She wasn't a victim in the same way Emily had been. Olivia was different, colder, precise, someone who fights back early. She didn't fall for Daniel's long-term pattern because she saw through him faster than most. But he had still managed to cause damage, not financially, but professionally. He spread rumors about her at the firm when she tried to warn another woman about him. That rumor forced her resignation. She lost a job she loved, and he walked away without consequence. "I'm not here to reopen old wounds," Olivia said. "I'm here because I have something you're going to need, something he doesn't know exists." She placed a small USB drive on the table. No label, no markings. "What's on it?" I asked. She gave a faint smile. "Proof that Margaret's involvement goes way deeper than you think." That sentence sat between us like a dropped weight, because up until that moment, I had assumed Margaret was just a delusional enabler, a woman obsessed with appearances, desperate to believe her son was a good man, bending reality to fit that fantasy. It never crossed my mind that she might be actively involved, strategically involved. But Olivia's expression said otherwise. "I'm not telling you what to do with it," she said, "but I know you, and I know you won't use it until the exact right moment." She wasn't wrong. We talked for a few more minutes, carefully, quietly. She didn't want to reopen her trauma. I didn't want to drown her in mine. But the moment she left, I understood something with terrifying clarity. Daniel's pattern wasn't spontaneous. It was generational. It had support, infrastructure. His mother wasn't just soothing his guilt. She was smoothing his path, helping him target women who, in her words, were too independent for their own good. And he had been planning to take the house because she believed he deserved it. I drove home with the USB in my pocket, feeling the weight of it grow heavier with every mile. Not because of what it contained, though I would soon discover that, but because of what it represented. Every woman before me had been dismissed, silenced, or shamed into disappearing quietly. Emily, Olivia, others I didn't even know the names of. But I wasn't disappearing. I was documenting. When I got home, Daniel was in the kitchen making breakfast, performing a version of domestic normalcy he must have thought would earn him points. He kissed my cheek, called me sweetheart, and went to shower. And for the first time in our marriage, I realized how artificial that word sounded coming from him. But then, here's the twist you need to understand. He did something almost convincing, something that might have swayed a different woman on a different day. He came out of the shower, hair damp, shoulders tense, and he sat beside me on the bed. He looked vulnerable, or at least he played it well. "Laura," he said, "I know I haven't been myself. I'm just overwhelmed. I don't want us to drift. I'll do better." On the surface, it was a tender moment, a husband admitting fault, a man trying. But everything in my body, everything in the winter folder, everything Emily had told me pointed to the same truth. This was not remorse. This was maintenance. He was maintaining access, maintaining control, maintaining the illusion that I didn't know what he was doing. I nodded slowly, touched his arm, and told him, "We'll figure it out." He smiled, relieved. He had no idea what I meant by "we," Because what I was figuring out had nothing to do with saving this marriage. It had everything to do with dismantling his strategy from the inside. And just when I thought the evening was over, my phone lit up again, this time with an alert I hadn't expected so soon. Something that proved Daniel wasn't just reckless, he was escalating. A new name had been added to an account he wasn't supposed to touch, Stephanie's. And that, right there, that changed the entire timeline of my operation. The moment the video loaded, I thought it was corrupted. The screen shook, the audio crackled, and for a second, all I saw was the edge of a countertop and someone's hand gripping a phone too tightly. Then the lens tilted, and Margaret's voice filled the room, sharp, impatient, the way she always got when she thought no one was watching. "Daniel, listen to me," she snapped. "You need to move quickly. Women like her don't stay blind forever." Women like her. She wasn't talking about me specifically. That part was obvious. This was a template, the same condescending framework she applied to every woman Daniel had cycled through. But then Margaret stepped fully into frame, and something in my stomach twisted. She was pacing in what looked like her bedroom, the same guest suite she occupied in my home. Behind her, I recognized the wallpaper I'd chosen years earlier, a soft blue pattern she'd once complained was too cold. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was plotting against me inside a room I decorated. "She has the assets," Margaret continued. "You don't. So act like the man of the house and take control before she starts asking questions." It wasn't the words. It was the tone. Firm, practiced, as if she'd said those same lines before, to other versions of me. I paused the video and felt my body go cold. Not fear, not even shock. It was recognition. The recognition that the part I thought was coincidence, or passive manipulation, or harmless meddling, wasn't. Margaret wasn't enabling him. She was training him. She had been for years. When I hit play again, the rest of the clip was even worse. Margaret leaned closer to the camera, lowering her voice to a whisper that somehow made everything louder. "If she panics, she'll leave. If she leaves, you get nothing. Keep her comfortable. Be sweet. Don't make her suspicious. But secure the house papers before the end of the quarter. Secure the house papers. My house. Papers she assumed were already slipping through my fingers." At the end of the clip, Margaret adjusted her blouse, smoothed her hair, and switched to the warm, doting expression she used in public. Then the video cut out. I sat there staring at the frozen frame for so long that the computer's screensaver kicked in. Not because I was stunned, I'd passed the point of stun, but because everything suddenly made sense. The sudden family dinners she insisted on, the way she inserted herself into small financial decisions, the strange urgency she had when suggesting Daniel take on more responsibility, as though my assets were some kind of inheritance he deserved by proximity. She wasn't an accessory. She was a strategist. And this time, she had picked the wrong target. Still, I didn't rush to confront Daniel or Margaret. That would have been emotional, reactive, sloppy. Instead, I added the video to the winter folder, time-stamped it, backed it up to 2 encrypted drives, and made a copy on cloud storage under a name so boring no one would ever click it. Then I did something counterintuitive, but essential. I behaved normally. I went downstairs, made myself a second cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen island while Daniel finished cooking. He handed me a plate like nothing was wrong. I smiled back, like I didn't know his mother was actively coaching him to steal the roof over my head. "You're quiet today," he said gently. "Just tired," I answered. "But I appreciate you making breakfast." He lit up with relief, and I studied his face, not to find guilt or fear, but to understand the man I was actually dealing with. Daniel wasn't a mastermind. He was a follower, a well-trained, well-managed follower. His confidence only existed when someone else fed it to him. Margaret had been feeding him for decades, and Stephanie was new fuel, fresh, naive, conveniently adoring. After breakfast, Daniel kissed my shoulder and said he'd be home late. "Big deadline," he claimed. I knew exactly where he was going, to meet Stephanie, or to call Margaret so she could continue revising his script. The moment the door closed, I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and opened my laptop again. I had all the evidence I needed to dismantle Daniel privately, but private damage wasn't enough anymore. This story needed a room he didn't control. A room where the truth wouldn't be his to narrate. And an opportunity came faster than I expected. At 11:32 a.m., my phone buzzed. An email from the company's HR department. Subject line: upcoming spouse financial review meeting, attendance optional. Attendance optional, which meant the spouse review wasn't really optional. It meant something inside Daniel's company had triggered a compliance flag, and if I showed up, I could speak. I leaned back in my chair, letting the significance settle over me. A room he didn't control. A room not run by Margaret. A room where the timeline mattered more than his charm. This wasn't just an opening. It was the beginning of the end. But what I didn't know, what no one could have predicted, was that Stephanie herself was about to make a mistake that accelerated everything by weeks. A mistake that landed right in my inbox and cracked the operation wide open. Stephanie's mistake arrived wrapped in innocence, which is usually how the most useful mistakes show up. A single email, one she probably thought was going straight to Daniel, one she had likely typed quickly, maybe even lovingly, without realizing that the address auto-filled to the wrong contact. To me, the subject line was harmless. Next steps. But the body was a gold mine. Daniel, your mom explained everything last night. I get it now. I really do. You're not trying to hurt her. You're trying to build a future with someone who actually believes in you. Just tell me when I should sign whatever's needed. I don't want to mess things up. There it was. The whole operation in plain, stupid text. She believed she was helping him secure a future. She believed needed signatures were normal. She believed Margaret was some benevolent mentor guiding the two of them toward stability. Most of all, she believed she was part of a love story, and he let her believe that. I didn't judge her. Not yet. Manipulators always pick women with a specific softness, the kind of softness they can mold. The softness I once had. The softness Emily once had. The softness Olivia had burned out of herself after being scorched by him. But what made the email truly invaluable was the timestamp. She had written it 13 minutes after Margaret pressured Daniel in that shaky video. 13 minutes. That meant Margaret called her after the recorded conversation. She wasn't just strategizing with Daniel. She was coaching the mistress, too. Coaching her to become his financial bridge. Coaching her to help extract assets from me. And Stephanie agreed. That was the moment I realized how deep the rot went. Not because Stephanie was malicious, she wasn't, but because she was so perfectly positioned to be manipulated. She wanted love. She wanted validation. And Margaret offered her a simple narrative. You are the one who truly supports him. You are the one he truly deserves. And Laura, she's just the obstacle. I forwarded the email to the winter folder, tagged it, annotated it, and sat back in my chair. The operation wasn't just documenting Daniel anymore. It was documenting Margaret's influence, Stephanie's collusion, and most importantly, it was establishing a pattern so detailed even the most skeptical observer couldn't call it a misunderstanding between spouses. Around noon, Daniel texted me a picture of his lunch, an overly curated shot of a salad bowl, his attempt at normalcy. I responded with a thumbs up because anything more would have been wasted energy. Then I reached out to HR, not to confirm my presence at the meeting, not to warn them, just to request the full scope of what spouse financial review entailed. The woman on the phone hesitated before answering, which told me everything I needed to know. It's a standard verification protocol when discrepancies appear between reported financial obligations and actual account movements, she said slowly. It's meant to protect all parties. Protect all parties. A diplomatic way of saying, someone's numbers don't add up. Daniel's. I didn't ask what the discrepancies were. I already had a good guess. The loan draft, the house listing under his name, the new authorized user, the shifting balances. All of it was now hitting an institution larger than him. And institutions don't gaslight. After the call, I stepped outside, letting the late morning sun warm my face. For a moment, just a moment, I allowed myself to feel the emotional side of all this. The betrayal, the layering of deception, the quiet cruelty of a mother molding her son into something dangerous. But even that moment didn't breach the surface for long. I had already transitioned into method, into alignment, into something colder and infinitely more stable. While I stood there, my phone rang again, unknown number. Normally, I don't pick those up, but something told me to answer. "Is this Laura Bennett?" a woman asked. "Yes." There was a pause, soft, shaky. "My name is Rachel Myers. You don't know me, but I think we need to talk about Daniel." My stomach tightened, not from fear, but from recognition. Another one. Her voice cracked as she continued. "I'm not calling to cause problems. I heard he's married now. I wanted to believe he'd changed. I really did." She stopped to breathe, and in that breath I understood. Rachel wasn't like Emily or Olivia. She hadn't reached the analytical stage yet. She was still bleeding emotionally, still confused, still trying to reconcile the man she loved with the reality she escaped from. "I left him 5 years ago," she whispered, "but not before losing my savings, my credit, my stability. He said he'd pay me back. He never did. And Margaret, she told me it was my fault for not being supportive enough. The same script, the same phrasing, the same mother. I guided her gently through the conversation, careful not to trigger shame. I told her just enough so she knew she wasn't alone, but not enough to reveal my operation prematurely. Then she said something that made the hairs on my arms rise. "He tried to get me to sign over my car, said it would help us refinance." Margaret called me personally to reassure me. She said it was normal. Her exact words were, "Daniel deserves a partner who invests in him." Invests. Another word Margaret loved. When Rachel finished talking, she asked me, timidly, "Do you think he meant to hurt me?" I answered honestly, "I don't think he knows how to be in a relationship without taking something." She cried quietly, not a dramatic cry, but the kind that sounds like the release of years of doubt. Before hanging up, she said one last thing, something small, almost an afterthought. "I don't know if this matters, but he told me once that when the timing was right, he'd move into his rightful home. I thought he meant with me. Maybe he meant with you. His rightful home." The words echoed like a riddle solving itself, because he'd been preparing for that home since day one. And now, with the meeting at his company approaching and a growing list of women behind him like shadows he refused to acknowledge, I realized something chilling. This wasn't a marital betrayal. It was a cycle. And cycles don't stop on their own. They stop when someone breaks them, publicly. And that's when I knew exactly what the meeting at his company was going to become. Not a review, a stage. But before that stage came the moment that finally ripped away the last piece of illusion. The night Margaret herself knocked on my door with a smile that almost hid her agenda. Almost. Margaret knocked on my door at 7:14 p.m., a time so precise that I immediately felt it wasn't a coincidence. Manipulators love spontaneous timings that are, in reality, rehearsed. When I opened the door, she was smiling, holding a box of cookies like we were in a sitcom where mother-in-law and daughter-in-law share sweet little bonding moments. "Laura, dear," she said softly, "I thought you might want some company tonight." Company. She had never stopped by unannounced before. Not once. Not in 9 years. I stepped aside, let her in, and watched closely the way she looked around the house, as if she were conducting an emotional audit of the territory she planned to take. Her gaze was evaluative, but disguised as affection. A look that only makes sense when you understand what's behind it. "Is everything all right?" she asked, taking a seat on the sofa like it belonged to her. "Daniel mentioned you've seemed distant." There it was, the test balloon. I smiled calmly. "Just tired," she sighed dramatically. A performance worthy of someone who spent years training to play fragile while actually operating like a general. "You know," Margaret said, crossing one leg over the other, "marriage goes through phases. Men, they get overwhelmed. They make mistakes. What matters is keeping the home stable." I didn't respond. I let the silence stretch, long enough for her to feel uncomfortable. Manipulators hate silence because it forces truth to leak through the cracks. And then came the first real attempt. "Laura, you trust Daniel, don't you?" Not a question, a demand. I tilted my head slightly. "Why wouldn't I?" She hesitated, a microsecond of hesitation, but enough to confirm she had come here with a purpose. And it wasn't to deliver cookies. Well, she smiled nervously. You two are discussing some paperwork soon, aren't you? Ah, the forbidden word, paperwork. I almost admired her boldness. What paperwork? I asked gently, as if I truly had no idea. Her eyes flickered, the first sign of genuine discomfort. Oh, I thought Daniel might have mentioned it. Just some routine adjustments couples make when planning long-term stability. Routine adjustments. That was the vocabulary she used to convince other women to hand over assets, cars, signatures, legal safety nets. The same expression Rachel had heard, the same idea, dressed up as commitment. I let her keep talking. Manipulators talk too much when they think they're in control. You see, dear, she continued, Daniel wants to feel secure. You know how men are. They need affirmation. If you show him you're committed, he'll relax. He'll be a better husband. Sometimes a symbolic gesture is all it takes. Symbolic gesture. The most cynical description of a property transfer I'd ever heard. I folded my hands calmly. And what gesture do you think he needs? She leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially, like we were sharing some feminine, almost maternal secret. Perhaps aligning the house paperwork to reflect unity. It would make him feel equal. She said it as if Daniel were being oppressed by me. He, the man quietly trying to steal from me. She, the woman who had raised an adult who believed he deserved everything without building anything. I didn't show anger. Anger would have fed her. Instead, I gave her a long, steady look. She mistook it for hesitation, but it was calculation. And then she dropped the line that turned the entire visit into documentary evidence, even without cameras. You're such a smart woman, Laura, she said sweetly. But smart women sometimes overthink. Just sign what Daniel needs. It'll make everyone's life easier. Everyone's life easier. As if my legal annihilation should be a family convenience. I smiled, a smile so small that only someone who knows me deeply would understand what it meant. Margaret, fortunately, does not know me. Thank you for your advice, I said, gently placing the cookie box on the table. I'll keep it in mind. Margaret looked victorious. She read compliance where there was only strategy. She squeezed my hand, a rehearsed gesture, almost theatrical. You're doing the right thing, dear? When she left the house, I didn't walk her to the door. I waited until she was halfway down the walkway before shutting it. I went back to the guest room, my war room, and recorded every detail of the conversation, every sentence, every coercive attempt. But something had changed, something subtle, something I couldn't fully articulate yet. Margaret wasn't just plotting. She was accelerating, pushing, pressuring for something to happen before the meeting at the company. And manipulators only accelerate when they feel time running out. What did she know that I didn't know yet? I thought about that question until my phone vibrated again. A message from an unknown number. I need to talk to you. It's about Daniel and something he's planning this week. Urgent. No name, no context, but the area code, the same as the company. And whatever this person knew, it came with a deadline. The message came again before I even finished reading it the first time. I know you've been looking into him. Please don't ignore this. He's trying to move something before Friday. Friday, the same day as the company meeting. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, analyzing whether it was a trap, a bluff, or someone who genuinely wanted to help. But the urgency didn't feel performative. It was short, direct, almost panicked. And that detail about before Friday sounded like someone who knew the company's internal clock. And Daniel's. I replied, "Who is this?" The answer came in less than 5 seconds. Someone who has seen this pattern before. That phrase again. The pattern. He didn't make new mistakes. He just recycled old ones. And maybe, for the first time, someone inside the company was seeing it not as hallway gossip, but as a concrete risk. I typed, "Can we talk?" The response came instantly. "I can't call, but I can send you something. Don't show it to him. Don't confront him. Just be prepared." And then it arrived. An audio file, 2 minutes and 53 seconds long. I put on my headphones, closed the door to my war room, and hit play. The first voice was male, probably recorded without permission. A hallway recording, muffled but clear enough. "Daniel, this isn't going to work. You can't use her personal information to solve your internal debts. Daniel's voice came next, irritated, almost bitten with frustration. You don't understand. If she signs a realignment as my guarantor, everything falls into place. It's symbolic. I just need it until the end of the quarter. Guarantor. The word that turns a relationship into a liability. A third voice, quieter, maybe someone farther away, asked, "And if she doesn't sign?" Daniel laughed. A laugh I knew too well. The lazy, confident laugh of a man who believes he controls the narrative. She will. My mother's talking to her. She knows how to handle women like Laura. Women like Laura. That phrase again. As if we were interchangeable, predictable, solvable pieces of a puzzle Margaret had mastered. But then came the part that made my body go still. Daniel continued. And if she hesitates, Stephanie will step in. She already agreed to sign some of the preliminary forms. Worst case scenario, I just need Laura to confirm the property alignment. Once that happens, it's done. Done. Final. Sealed. The house. The asset. My signature. That was what he needed. Before Friday. Not reconciliation. Not repair. Protection from the audit he knew was coming. He assumed I would sign spontaneously, just to keep peace. He assumed I would fall for the performance he and Margaret were choreographing. He assumed the woman who built the financial structure of the household was naive enough to sign her own trap. When the audio ended, I sat in silence, not from shock, but from comprehension. Until then, I'd had pieces. Now, I had the entire framework. It wasn't just Daniel I was dealing with. It was a system. And systems don't collapse from one blow. They collapse from exposure. I needed to think beyond Daniel, beyond Margaret, beyond Stephanie. I needed to think about Friday, the room he doesn't control. A company meeting isn't a private argument. It isn't a kitchen confession. It's documented, timed, witnessed. And Daniel has always relied on intimate spaces to rewrite reality. A public room would strip him of that power. When I realized that, something settled inside me. I was no longer reacting. I was constructing. But before Friday, there was one variable I still hadn't examined closely. Stephanie. Not to humiliate her, not to confront her, but to understand the emotional softness that Daniel and Margaret exploited. However, before I even made a plan, my phone vibrated again. Another message from the same unknown number. This time, a photo. Stephanie, sitting alone in the company parking lot, crying. Not with anger, not with guilt, but with fear. The text under the photo said, "She thinks he's leaving you for her, but he's not leaving you. He's switching hosts." Hosts, sources, providers. Daniel didn't love women. He used them. Before I could respond, another message came. "If you don't stop him this week, someone else will replace you, and then you'll just become another pattern story." Pattern story. A fate I refused to join. The photo, the messages, the audio, everything formed a single, undeniable truth. Daniel didn't want a marriage. He wanted infrastructure, and Margaret wanted control over whoever provided it. I sat there in the dim light of the guest room, the war room, the evidence room, and felt something sharp and steady rise in my chest. I wasn't just going to stop his pattern. I was going to turn the pattern into evidence. And Friday? Friday would not be a meeting. It would be the first strike. I didn't sleep that night, not out of fear and not out of emotional turmoil. Those phases were long gone. I stayed awake because my mind had officially stepped out of the reactive zone and into full operational design. Every pattern, every voice, every timeline was aligning into a single, coherent picture. Daniel wasn't improvising a collapse. He was trying to engineer a transfer. Financial, emotional, territorial. And Margaret was the project manager behind the entire architecture. Stephanie was the temporary vessel. And I was meant to be the bridge they walked over. Not anymore. By the time the sky began to lighten, I had reviewed all the videos, messages, screenshots, and the audio clip at least a dozen times. I wasn't looking for surprises anymore. I was organizing, structuring. I created 3 timelines: Daniel's behaviors, Margaret's interventions, and Stephanie's involvement. When I laid them side by side, patterns weren't just visible, they were undeniable. Daniel only escalated manipulations when Margaret reassured him. Margaret only reassured him when a transfer was near. Stephanie only participated when she believed it was for love. 3 different vectors, all leading to one objective: my signature before Friday. I stared at the timelines as if they were crime scene boards. In a way, they were. Only this wasn't a crime of passion. It was a crime of entitlement. Around 8 a.m., I made a pot of coffee and stood by the kitchen window, watching the world wake up as if nothing in it had shifted. Birds chirping, joggers passing by, neighbors rushing to work. Ordinary life. And yet, inside my home, inside my mind, a quiet war was unfolding. One that no one else would ever see until the moment I decided to show it. Daniel texted me around 8:17 a.m. Good morning, beautiful. Hope you slept well. Big day today. Let's have dinner later. A heart, a fake normal, a man rehearsing tenderness because it was part of the script. I replied, dinner sounds good. He needed to believe I was softening. Compliance reinforces confidence, and confidence makes people sloppy. I needed him sloppy. Right after his message, I received another one from the unknown sender. He's meeting Stephanie at lunch. She thinks he's ending things with you today. Today. Interesting, because in the audio, he said he needed me until Friday, which meant that, to Stephanie, he was staging a completely different version of the story. He always did this. Multiple realities, each tailored to the woman he needed for the next phase. I replied, "Why are you helping me?" A long pause. Then, because no one helped me. The pit in my stomach formed instantly. Another story, another pattern, another woman crushed by the soft, polite, supposedly harmless hands of Daniel and Margaret. I typed one last question. Who are you? The answer arrived a full minute later, long enough to make me think she might have changed her mind. I'm his sister. I froze. Daniel had never mentioned a sister, not once in 9 years. Margaret always talked about how he was an only child, the pride of the family, her miracle boy. She used that narrative to justify the insane level of control she exercised over every aspect of his life. But now there was a sister, a shadow sibling, silenced, omitted, hidden like an inconvenient truth. Before I could ask anything, another message followed. She doesn't acknowledge me publicly. I don't fit the image, but I know him better than anyone. And I know what he becomes when someone stops him. My heart pounded, not in fear, but in recognition. Margaret didn't want the world to know Daniel wasn't her only project. She wanted a clean story, polished, symmetrical, a mother raising one golden son, one singular success story. A daughter didn't fit that symmetry, especially not a daughter who didn't bend to her script. I wrote, "Do you have proof of what he's trying to do before Friday?" She replied instantly, "Yes, and you need to see it before you walk into that room at the company." She added, "Meet me today, discreetly." I stared at the message, weighing risks. Everything in me said this was real. The emotional cadence, the language, the pain woven between the lines. People who've been through this don't talk like outsiders. They talk like survivors. I asked for a location. She sent one, a small park near the river, at 2:30 p.m. Before I could reply, she sent one last message. Don't trust anyone until then, especially not him. He's planning something after lunch. My phone buzzed again, this time from Daniel. Running errands with my mom today. She wanted to talk to you later. Is that okay? Errands. His version of smoothing the narrative. I responded, "Sure." He added, "I love you." And that's when I felt it. Not anger, not sadness, an ending. When manipulators feel cornered, they tend to use big, vague, emotional declarations, hoping to distract you from the architecture of their actions. Saying "I love you" at the exact moment he was organizing my replacement was almost comedic in its irony. At lunchtime, I drove toward the meeting spot. I parked a few blocks away, just to be cautious. The park was quiet, some people walking, kids playing, a couple with a dog. Everything looked so normal. It almost hurt to think about the chaos hidden inside people's lives. I sat on a bench facing the river. The water moved calmly. I didn't rehearse anything. I was beyond rehearsals. I was present. At exactly 2:30, a woman approached, slightly older than Daniel, with tired eyes, cautious steps, and a kind of quiet strength that only shows up in people who've survived deep manipulation. "Laura," she asked. "Yes." She sat down, leaving a respectful distance between us. "My name is Hannah. Hannah, Daniel's hidden sister." She studied me for a long moment before speaking again. "You remind me of someone I used to be, before I understood that love shouldn't cost everything." I swallowed. "You said he's planning something before Friday." She nodded and opened her bag, taking out a thin envelope, old, worn, but heavy in meaning. "Daniel has done this before," she murmured. "Not exactly this way, but close. Every time there's pressure in his life, he finds a woman who can absorb it. A woman Margaret approves of. A woman who gives him a ladder." She handed me the envelope. Inside were bank statements, copies of past agreements, screenshots of messages between Daniel and Margaret about previous women, women whose names I recognized and women I didn't. But the most damning document wasn't from the past. It was dated 3 days ago. A pre-filled marital asset alignment form, listing the house under shared ownership transition, with only my signature missing. Margaret had signed her part as a witness. Daniel had signed as primary spouse. My signature line was blank. And yet, in the distribution notes, it already read, "Pending transfer, Friday." They had already scheduled the victory, without me. I looked up at Hannah, the envelope trembling slightly in my hands. She whispered, "He's not trying to end a marriage, he's trying to secure a landing." A landing, like a pilot abandoning a burning plane. I exhaled slowly. "Why are you helping me?" Her eyes softened with something that wasn't pity, just recognition. "Because I want the cycle to end with you." And then she said the sentence that changed everything, the line that blew open the scale of my operation. "You're the first one who has enough proof, enough clarity, and enough access to finally expose not just Daniel, but Margaret." Expose Margaret, the woman who believed she was untouchable, the mother who saw herself as morally above everyone else, the strategist who turned women into resources. I closed the envelope. The river kept moving. The world kept going. But inside me, something clicked into its final position. Friday wouldn't be a meeting. It would be a reckoning. Hannah stood up to leave and added one last thing over her shoulder. "Be careful tonight. Daniel thinks you're signing something after dinner." I didn't drive home immediately after meeting Hannah. I sat in my car for almost 20 minutes, letting the pieces settle into place inside my mind, not emotionally but structurally, like sliding the final tiles into a mosaic that had been forming for years. Nothing she told me contradicted what I already knew. Instead, it sharpened it, clarified it, gave it a lineage. Daniel wasn't improvising his manipulations. He was inheriting them. By the time I turned the key in the ignition, my body had shifted into a calm so deep it almost felt foreign. Not numbness, precision, a clarity I had never experienced before. It wasn't revenge that pulsed in my veins. It was inevitability. When I arrived home, Daniel's car wasn't in the driveway. Margaret's wasn't either. The house was silent in a way that wasn't peaceful, just empty. A pause between two moves in a game I had finally mastered. I set the envelope Hannah gave me on the kitchen table. I didn't open it again. I didn't need to. The contents were burned into my memory with perfect accuracy. The signatures, the timelines, the explicit evidence of coordination between Daniel and Margaret, the pre-filled asset alignment form, everything I needed for Friday. I walked upstairs, changed clothes, washed my face, and forced myself to eat something simple. Not because I was hungry, but because clarity requires energy, and I intended to walk into the next phase of this operation with a body as steady as my mind. At 6:41 p.m., Daniel texted me, "On my way home? Dinner at 7? Thinking Italian." Italian. He always chose Italian when he needed me. Softened, soothed, sentimental. Someone must have told him once that women can't resist pasta and candlelight. I replied, "Perfect. See you soon." I set the phone down gently, then sat at the dining table in silence, waiting. Not nervously, Anticipation requires fear or hope. I felt neither. What I felt was alignment. At 7:03, I heard his car pull into the driveway. The door opened. His footsteps crossed the entryway. He walked into the dining room with that polished grin he wore whenever he thought he was performing sincerity. "You look beautiful," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. I let him. When emotional detachment is complete, even a kiss becomes nothing more than a data point. He brought out the takeout bags, setting them on the table with an exaggerated flourish. I figured we could have a relaxed night, talk a little, reset. Reset. A corporate term, one that usually means, we're going to pretend nothing happened and hope you cooperate. We sat down to eat. He served me first, another calculated gesture. Daniel always used gentlemanliness as a smokescreen. He talked about work for a while, careful not to mention the meeting on Friday. He talked about his Mother's Day, pretending it had been uneventful. He even joked about forgetting to pay a bill, watching my face for signs of irritation. He was testing the waters, evaluating compliance, measuring my softness. I gave him nothing. Halfway through the meal, he reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "Laura, I know things haven't been perfect lately, and I know I've been off, but I want us to be strong again. I want us to feel like us." The performance was well rehearsed. Vulnerability, eye contact, softened voice, all the things that would have worked on me years ago. But the timing was too perfect, too aligned with the looming audit, too aligned with Margaret's escalating pressure. "Of course," I whispered. "We'll get there." He exhaled in visible relief. Then came the moment he had been working toward, the one Margaret had been pushing him toward. "Actually," he said, shifting in his chair with staged hesitation, "there's something I wanted to talk to you about tonight. Something small, just something symbolic." Symbolic, the same word Margaret had used. He reached into his bag and pulled out a document envelope. Neat, crisp, recently sealed. I recognized the weight of it without even touching it. "Before you worry," he said quickly, "it's not a big deal. It's just a small adjustment for some of our accounts, just to make things easier while the company reorganizes a few things on my end." On his end, never ours, never mine. He slid the envelope closer to me. My name was written on it, in his handwriting, carefully shaped to look gentle. My heart didn't spike. My breath didn't hitch. I was beyond physiological reactions. I opened the envelope with perfect calm. Inside was a shortened version of the asset alignment form Hannah had shown me. He had tried to hide it with different formatting, a simpler layout, fewer clauses, but it was the same document, the same trap, the same signature line waiting for me. Daniel watched me closely, his smile tight with expectation. "It's really just a formality," he murmured. "Just us, aligning." I looked at him for a long, still moment. "Daniel," I said softly, "would you mind getting me a pen?" He blinked, surprised, then lit up with relief and triumph, so visible it was almost embarrassing. "Of course," he said, nearly tripping over himself as he went to the drawer. He thought he'd won. He thought I was yielding. He thought Margaret's training had finally paid off. He returned with the pen and placed it next to the document. "There you go," he whispered. "Take your time." But I didn't reach for the pen. I reached for the envelope and slid it back toward him. His smile faltered. "What are you doing?" he asked, trying to laugh, like this was some flirty little game. I didn't smile. "Daniel," I said quietly, "I'm not signing anything tonight." He stared at me, confusion flickering into irritation. "But we talked about unity, about stability." "No," I interrupted gently. "You talked, and you assumed I wouldn't think." Then came the moment, the one I had been waiting for. The mask cracked. Fear. Real fear. The kind that only appears when a manipulator senses their timeline collapsing. "What did you hear?" he whispered. Not, "What do you mean?" Not, "What's wrong?" Not, "Why are you upset?" What did you hear? Because he knew someone had spoken. He just didn't know who. I stood up calmly, collected the empty plates, and walked them to the sink. Behind me, I could feel his breath unsteady, the panic rising as the silence stretched. "Laura," he said, voice tightening, "please tell me what's going on." I turned slowly and looked at him, not the husband he pretended to be, but the man he actually was. Dinner was lovely, I said softly, but you and I are done signing things in private. His eyes widened with realization. Friday. He understood now. And that's when he said the one sentence that confirmed everything Hannah had warned me about. You're not walking into that meeting. I smiled. Oh, Daniel, I whispered. You have no idea where I'm walking. I grabbed my coat, my keys, and the envelope he'd handed me, which I folded neatly and put into my bag. His voice rose behind me. Laura, wait! Where are you going? I opened the front door without looking back. To prepare, I said. Then I closed it behind me, leaving him in the house he thought he already owned. I didn't drive anywhere that night. Not yet. Leaving the house wasn't about fleeing. It was about breaking the illusion that everything still revolved around Daniel's timing. Instead of speeding off dramatically, I sat in my car at the end of the driveway, engine off, hands on the steering wheel, listening. Through the front window, I could see him moving back and forth like a caged animal. At first, he looked confused, then angry, then scared. That's the order it usually happens in. Confusion when the script stops working, anger when control slips, fear when they realize there is an audience they can't see. My phone lit up on the passenger seat. First text, where did you go? Second, can we talk about this like adults? Third, Laura, don't do anything stupid. There it was. The word they always default to when a woman stops cooperating. Stupid. I turned the phone face down and let the quiet of the street wrap around me. A few porch lights were on. A dog barked in the distance. Somewhere, a TV laughed for someone who still believed their living room was safe. I didn't feel safe, but I did feel certain. After a few minutes, I turned the key and drove. Not to a friend's house, not to a hotel, not to some dramatic refuge. I drove to a place with cameras, security, and neutral territory. A bank. It was late, but the lobby ATMs were still accessible and the parking lot was lit. I parked under a camera on purpose, then pulled out my phone again. This time, I wasn't reading Daniel's messages. I was looking at the email from HR. Spouse financial review meeting. Attendance optional. I clicked reply. Confirming my attendance, I wrote. Please let me know if legal or compliance will be present. I hovered a second, then added, I will be bringing documentation. I hit send. Then I did one more thing. I opened my contacts and found Emily's number. I stared at it for a moment, then hit call. She picked up on the second ring. Laura, I'm going to expose him on Friday, I said, skipping any pretense. Not just him, Margaret too. Silence. Then a sharp inhale. At the company, she asked. Yes, there will be HR, possibly legal, possibly internal auditors. Her voice was careful. What do you need from me? Your story, I said. Not in person, not to be interrogated. Just your timeline in writing, dates, numbers, key phrases, anything that shows he tried to use your credit and your trust the same way. She was quiet for a beat. He did, she said softly, repeatedly. I know, I said. Now I need them to know. I'll send you everything tonight, she whispered. I thought I wanted to forget him. Turns out I wanted him held accountable more. When I hung up, I messaged Rachel next. I didn't ask her to relive everything. I asked her for one thing only. The information about the car, the refinancing attempt, the call from Margaret. Then I sent a brief message to Olivia. Friday, company meeting. I'll be using the USB. If you're willing, I'd like to reference your experience anonymously. Her reply came almost immediately. Do it. Use everything. The winter folder wasn't just a private archive anymore. It was a case file. Back in the driver's seat, I scrolled past Daniel's texts without opening them. I didn't need his words. I already had his actions recorded in digital ink. A new email came in, this time from HR. Thank you for confirming, Mrs. Bennett. Yes, a representative from compliance will be present. You are welcome to bring documentation if you feel it is relevant. Relevant. That word alone almost made me laugh. I drove home, not slowly, not fast, just steady. The house looked the same from the outside. Inside, nothing was the same. Daniel was waiting near the foyer, posture tight, like a man who couldn't decide whether to play the victim or the authority figure. Where did you go? He asked, voice too controlled. For a drive, I said simply, placing my bag on the console table. We were in the middle of a conversation, he insisted. No, I replied, walking past him. You were in the middle of a performance. I stepped out. His jaw tightened. This is exactly what I meant. You overreact. You run. You don't talk. I turned to look at him. Really look at him. The man who believed that every woman in his life was an interchangeable resource. The man raised by a mother who taught him that discomfort was an enemy to be outsourced to someone else. I'm done talking in private, I said calmly. If you have anything to say, you can say it on Friday. He went pale. What do you mean? He asked. HR invited me to the meeting, I replied. I confirmed. Something flickered in his eyes. Blame, then panic, then calculation. You don't understand how these things work, he tried. It'll just complicate everything if you show up emotional. I'm not emotional, I said. And for the first time in a long time, it was completely, utterly true. I'm prepared. I walked to the guest room and closed the door, leaving him standing in the hallway. This time, I didn't sit at the desk. I laid everything out on the bed instead. Printed emails, screenshots, the loan draft. The pre-filled alignment form Hannah had shown me. The shorter version Daniel had tried to slide across the dinner table. The transcript I'd made from the audio clip. Still images paused from Margaret's video. The text from Stephanie. The message Hannah sent with the photo of Stephanie crying in the parking lot. For a moment, I just looked at the bed. It didn't look like a marriage anymore. It looked like evidence. If you're listening to this and you've ever had that quiet realization that the life you thought you were building with someone is actually a crime scene they're hoping you won't examine, hit like on this video and subscribe. Not for me, but as a way of saying to yourself, I'm done pretending not to see what's in front of me. I organized the documents into folders, one for financial evidence, one for behavioral patterns, one for Margaret's direct involvement, one for corroborating testimonies. I didn't need to overwhelm them on Friday. I just needed to be undeniable. There's a difference. Around 11:30 p.m., there was a soft knock at the guest room door. Laura? Daniel's voice. Can we please talk? I didn't answer. He knocked again, more insistent. Please, I'm trying here. Trying. A word that sounds noble until you look at the context in which it's used. I opened the door just enough to stand in the gap. What are you trying, Daniel? I asked. He blinked, surprised by the question. I'm trying to fix this. I'm trying to get us back. You're trying to get me to sign something before your meeting, I said evenly. That's not fixing. That's damage control. For you. His silence said more than his words. Did your mother tell you to say that? I asked softly. Something in his face twisted. You're being cruel. No, I said. I'm being accurate. He swallowed, anger flashing across his features. You're going to embarrass me in front of my colleagues. Finally, the real fear surfaced. I held his gaze. I'm not going there to embarrass you, Daniel. I'm going there to correct the record. I'm your husband, he snapped, and I was your ecosystem, I replied. You treated me like an institution you could drain without consequences. On Friday, you're going to learn what happens when the institution speaks. For a second, I thought he might lunge, scream, break something. Instead, he did what he always did when cornered. He switched tactics. His shoulders slumped. His eyes glassed over. Laura, I'm scared, he whispered. I'm under so much pressure. I just needed help. I never meant to hurt you. There it was, the final mask. The frightened boy, the one Margaret kept in her pocket for emergencies. If I hadn't seen the documents, the video, the messages, the patterns, maybe I'd have believed him. Maybe I'd have extended one more second chance. Maybe I'd have become exactly what Rachel and Emily once were, a woman who believed his fear was proof of depth instead of proof of exposure. But the difference between then and now was simple. Back then, I had doubt. Now, I had evidence. I believe you're scared, I said quietly. I just don't believe you're scared for me. His face hardened again. If you do this, he said slowly, there's no going back. I nodded. I know, I said. That's the point. I closed the door and locked it. Not because I thought he would burst in, but because I needed the symbolic click of that lock to echo in my own head. The rest of the night, I hardly moved. I lay down fully clothed, eyes open in the dark, breathing steady. I wasn't thinking about Friday in terms of outcome. I was thinking about it in terms of posture. I would walk into that room not as Daniel's wife, not as Margaret's disappointing daughter-in-law, not as a scared woman holding her life together with shaking hands. I would walk in as the person who owned the house, the documents, the timeline, and the truth. And somewhere between 3 and 4 a.m., as the house finally fell silent, I realized something else. They had spent years training Daniel to believe that love meant access. On Friday, he was going to learn that boundaries mean exit. For him, not me. And that, more than any legal outcome, was the beginning of my revenge. Not the loud kind, the procedural kind. The kind that starts when you stop arguing in kitchens and start telling the truth in rooms they don't control. Morning arrived without ceremony. No sunrise epiphany, no trembling revelation. Just the quiet, steady awareness that today was Thursday. One day before the meeting. One day before Daniel's carefully constructed world collided with the one thing he'd never anticipated. Documentation. I got out of bed, showered, dressed in something simple. Black slacks, a fitted blouse, nothing dramatic. Power, when it's real, doesn't need decoration. I tied my hair back, not because I wanted to look severe, but because I needed nothing in my face. Nothing distracting, nothing that could be interpreted as nervousness. When I stepped out of the guest room, Daniel was in the hallway. He'd been waiting. He looked like he hadn't slept either. His eyes were puffy, hair disheveled, mouth set in a fragile, hopeful line. "Good morning," he said softly. "Morning," I replied, walking past him toward the stairs. He followed. "Can we talk before I leave for work?" "No," I said, not unkindly. "We'll talk tomorrow. You're not giving me a chance," he said, voice cracking just enough to seem vulnerable, but only if you didn't know the timing. I paused at the bottom step and looked at him fully. "You had years of chances," I said. "I'm not withholding anything. I'm simply done offering what you kept wasting." He opened his mouth to argue, to perform, to twist, but he must have seen something in my eyes that made him stop, something final. He left for work 15 minutes later. He didn't kiss me goodbye this time. Manipulators don't perform affection when they feel it won't yield results. After the front door closed, I sat at the dining table with my laptop and a cup of coffee that went cold before I took a sip. I opened the winter folder and made the final adjustments to 3 documents I planned to bring. 1. A timeline of events. 2. A summary of financial irregularities. 3. A pattern analysis supported by corroborating testimony from previous partners. I didn't embellish anything, didn't dramatize, didn't editorialize. Facts don't need adjectives. Around 10 ODM, my phone lit up with a message from Hannah. "Be cautious today. Margaret is nervous. When she's nervous, she gets aggressive. Aggressive, not physically. Manipulators rarely operate in blunt force. Aggressive emotionally, aggressive strategically." I replied, "Thank you. Tomorrow will settle everything." She texted back, "End it. For all of us. For all of us." The phrase landed heavier than I expected. Because as much as this was about my own survival, Daniel's pattern had victims before me, and if left unchecked, would have victims after me. Exposing him wasn't just self-defense. It was a firewall. At 12:47 p.m., while I was reviewing the last set of documents, a car pulled into my driveway. Margaret's. Not unexpected. Annoying, but predictable. She didn't knock this time. She rang the bell like a queen summoning a servant. I opened the door. Expression neutral. Posture controlled. "Laura," she said with too bright enthusiasm, "I thought we could have lunch. We haven't had a proper mother-in-law and daughter-in-law day in ages." "We've never had one," I said. Her smile flickered before snapping into place again. "Well, today can be the first." "I have work to do," I replied. "It'll only take an hour," she insisted, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. She always treated boundaries like furniture, optional and easily rearranged. I let her in, not because I wanted her there, but because fights behind closed doors leave no witnesses. Conversations in open spaces leave no documentation gaps. She walked straight into the living room, sat on the sofa, her favorite spot, the one she'd already mentally claimed, and folded her hands primly in her lap. Daniel told me you two had a little misunderstanding last night, she said with a tone that implied I was being dramatic. We didn't misunderstand each other, I said calmly. I understood him perfectly. She inhaled sharply through her nose. Laura, dear, men make mistakes. You can't keep punishing him for— I'm not punishing him, I said. I'm preparing. Her brows knit. Preparing for what? Tomorrow. The stillness that followed was almost cinematic. Her eyes narrowed by a fraction. You're not actually planning to go to that meeting, are you? I am. She laughed, a brittle, incredulous sound. Oh, Laura, those meetings aren't meant for women who are upset. They're for partners who support each other. It would be humiliating for Daniel if you showed up with emotions. I took a slow breath, then leaned against the armchair across from her. Margaret, I said quietly, what exactly do you think I'm bringing to that meeting tomorrow? Her throat bobbed. Well, I assume concerns. Evidence, I corrected. She stiffened. Evidence of what? She asked, voice shrinking even as she tried to sound indignant. Patterns, I said. Financial irregularities, manipulation, attempted transfers, documentation, audio. The color drained from her face, but not in fear for Daniel, in fear for herself. Laura, she whispered, you don't understand what you're doing. I understand perfectly. You're destroying a marriage. No, I said softly. You and Daniel destroyed the marriage. I'm protecting myself. She stood abruptly, smoothing her blouse with trembling hands. Listen to me carefully, she said, voice dropping into something cold and unfamiliar. If you walk into that meeting tomorrow, you won't just end your marriage. You will ruin Daniel's reputation, his career, his future, all things he was willing to risk for a signature, I replied. She flinched. You think people will believe you? She demanded. You think they'll see past your dramatics? I didn't raise my voice. Emotion is a gift you give manipulators. I wasn't gifting her anything. I don't need them to believe me, I said. I just need them to see what's on paper. She inhaled sharply, fear curdling into something more feral. You have no idea who you're dealing with, she hissed. I do, I said. A mother who built a son she could operate through. A man who thinks women are ladders. A family system that mistakes extraction for love. You're making a mistake, she said. It won't be the first one I've corrected, I replied. Margaret stepped closer, lowering her voice into a sharp whisper. If you speak tomorrow, Daniel will lose everything. I met her gaze without blinking. Good, I said. Then he'll finally understand what loss feels like. She froze. For the first time since I'd known her, she didn't have a script. She grabbed her purse, stormed toward the door, and threw one final line over her shoulder. You are not as powerful as you think. I didn't follow her. I didn't slam the door behind her. I simply watched her leave and let the quiet return. Then, after a long moment, I whispered to the empty room, I don't need power. I just need the truth. I sat back down at the dining table and opened the winter folder again, just to feel the weight of it, the solidity of it, the undeniability of it. Tomorrow wasn't going to be a confrontation. It was going to be an unveiling. And for the first time since this began, I felt something new stirring in my chest. Not fear, not anger, relief. Because the end wasn't coming. The end was already here. Friday didn't feel like a climax. It felt like walking into a room I had already memorized. I woke up before the alarm, dressed with the same calm I used the day before, and reviewed the documents one final time. Not because I doubted them, but because certainty is a ritual. It steadies the hands and clears the voice. Daniel moved quietly around the house that morning. Not tender, not angry, just calculating. The silence of someone rehearsing a speech he would never get to finish. When he finally approached me in the kitchen, he looked like a man who had aged a decade overnight. Laura, he said quietly, please, don't do this. We can talk after work. We can fix this privately. Privately, of course. Private is where liars thrive. I finished my coffee, set the mug in the sink, and turned to him. Daniel, I said, if you wanted privacy, you shouldn't have involved institutions. He swallowed hard. I'm begging you. You're not begging, I replied softly. You're bargaining, and you're out of currency. I walked past him, grabbed my bag, and headed for the door. When I reached the car, he followed, still playing the role of a reasonable, wounded man. Just think, he pleaded. Think about what this will look like. I said, unlocking the car. I'm done thinking alone. I drove to the company with the windows cracked open, letting cold air clear away the last fog of sentiment. The building was glossy, modern, cold, perfect for a truth that needed no warmth. Inside, HR directed me to a conference room, long table, frosted glass walls, a pitcher of water no one would touch. 3 people already seated, an HR rep, a compliance officer, and someone from internal audit. Neutral faces, institutional posture. Perfect. Daniel arrived 2 minutes late. He looked surprised to see that they had seated me on the opposite end of the table, not beside him, not aligned with him, positioned independently. Let's begin, the compliance officer said. Daniel jumped in quickly, too quickly. This is all just a misunderstanding, my wife and I. I'd like to speak first, I said. The officer nodded. Mrs. Bennett, go ahead. I opened my folder. Daniel's eyes widened, just slightly, but enough. I started with the timeline, calm, precise, factual, no embellishment. I described the loan draft, the unauthorized account changes, the attempted transfer of property, the inconsistencies between his declared obligations and real financial movements. Then I presented the documents, emails, screenshots, metadata, the pre-filled alignment form, the shorter form he tried to get me to sign over dinner, the screenshot of Stephanie promising to sign anything needed, the corroboration from former partners, names redacted, stories aligned, then the audio clip. When Daniel heard his own voice played back, confident, arrogant, strategic, he physically recoiled. A man hearing, for the first time, how he sounds in truth instead of performance. And then I played the video. Margaret's voice filled the room. Daniel, you need to move quickly. Women like her don't stay blind forever. The silence afterward was surgical. The compliance officer clicked his pen once, an involuntary reaction. The HR rep blinked rapidly. Processing. The auditor sat back in his chair, eyes sharp, expression unreadable. Daniel looked like he was dissolving from the inside out. This is all taken out of context, he stammered. It's your voice, I said simply. And hers, the auditor added. Daniel's mouth opened, closed, opened again. It's not, I was under pressure. The compliance officer raised a hand. Mr. Bennett, we will speak with you separately. For now, allow your wife to finish. Ex-wife, Daniel spat. Too quickly. I didn't even flinch. The auditor made a note. So you are aware divorce is being pursued? Daniel froze. Institutions love slips. I continued with the evidence from Rachel and Emily, anonymized, summarized, but clear enough to establish a pattern of exploiting women for credit, refinancing, and asset leverage. This is not a marital conflict, I said, looking directly at the 3 representatives. This is financial misconduct intersecting with personal manipulation, and it is not the first time. He targets women who trust him, then uses that trust to access property, credit, and resources. His mother encourages and guides that behavior. The auditor nodded slowly. It appears consistent with the information we have. Daniel's head snapped toward him. Information you... The HR rep cleared her throat. There are internal concerns that predate today's meeting. A cold, perfect sentence. One Daniel was not prepared for. He looked at me then, really looked, and what he saw wasn't anger. It was absence. The absence of care, the absence of fear, the absence of the ecosystem he had lived off of for 9 years. He deflated. The meeting continued for nearly an hour. The institution asked questions, took notes, cross-referenced data I didn't even know they had. By the end, Daniel was told he was being placed under immediate review, pending further investigation. His voice was barely a whisper. Laura, please. But I wasn't his anchor anymore. When it was over, I closed my folder, stood up, and thanked the panel for their time. Basic courtesy, the kind he thought was optional. Daniel tried to approach me, but the compliance officer stepped between us. Mr. Bennett, you need to remain here. The last thing I saw before the door closed was his face collapsing into the reality Margaret had never prepared him for. A world where women speak, a world where institutions listen, a world where consequences exist. I walked out of the building into fresh, bright daylight. No dramatic music, no slow-motion triumph, just the quiet satisfaction of alignment, not vengeance. Equilibrium. Epilogue. I moved out 2 weeks later. I didn't take much, just what was mine. The house remained in my name. Legally, permanently, Margaret no longer visits. She sent one letter, full of self-pity and revisionism. I filed it under noise. Daniel was eventually terminated. Not because of me alone, but because of the pattern. Patterns always surface. As for me, I sleep deeply, peacefully. My new apartment is smaller, brighter, mine. Every corner is quiet in the right ways. And the truth is this: the best revenge isn't what you do to someone. It's what they never again have the power to do to you. If you stayed with me through this entire story, if you've ever been underestimated, drained, or rewritten, hit like, subscribe, and leave a in the comments so I know you made it to the end with me. Because women like us, we don't stay blind forever. We learn, we document, we rise.